All right, everyone. It's another Friday, so it must be time for Q&A with Marshall. Alan and Marshall, what's our show name?
I don't know. We need to change the name.
I'm Marshall Atkinson.
I'm Alan Howe with Easy Way.
And who's this character with us, Alan?
Man, of course, we have, you and I are worthless on this, so we've got to bring people in who are smarter than us. And man, I'm excited
that's not
for
hard
this.
To do.
He's shaking his head right now. But man, you know what? I want to introduce Dave Dennings. Dave, I'm not even sure what your title is now with Kiwo. I consider you the application guru for Kiwo. But Dave, I have known since back in his days with what was called Tetco. We would know it as CFAR. And he's kind of the go-to guy I go to when I have an emulsion question. So when it comes to, I'm excited about this show. This is my wheelhouse. We're talking stencil. We're going to be talking light. We're going to be talking, screen printing. And Dave, man, I am honored to have you. Thank you for taking the time.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Pleasure to be on with these two famous characters here.
Well, and we have to pay homage because, Marshall, right? Because he is the chairman of the Academy.
Yes.
Right now, which Dave is loving that title. He hates. But yeah, so it's great working with you, and we're glad to have you on.
Thank you.
So thank you for taking the time.
So let's say hi to some folks real quick, and we'll get going. So our buddy Ray's here. Greetings, Screenlings, and Dr. Dennings. Josh is here. Good morning. And Mark's here. Good morning, guys. Hey, Dave. And so there we go. And we'll probably get some more people saying hello. And what we'd love for you to do is just say hi. Let us know where you're watching from. Also, if you would do us a huge favor and share that you're watching. We, of course, want to build our audience, and that really helps us. And also, I know a lot of you guys are watching this as a recording. That's by far our most popular way to view the content here. So if you're watching this as a recording, can you please let us know that you're doing that by leaving a comment or something wherever you're watching, and that helps us out also. So
absolutely.
Anyway, it's lots of stuff going on, and what I'd love to do now, Alan, is oh, hey, look, Donna Lance is here. Hey, Dave.
Hey, Donna.
What I'd love to do is roll the commercial real quick so we can get into the discussion. What do you think?
Let's do that because it's going to be a good one.
So huge shout out again, of course, to GSG for sponsoring our show. We really love you guys. And here's their commercial. So enjoy.
GSG, the combination of over half a century of knowledge with industry-leading technology and the customer at the center of everything that we do. Graphic Solutions Group is a powerhouse distributor of traditional screen, sign, wide format digital printing, embroidery, and textile decorating. We are committed to our customers, providing support, educational, and consulting services. Your success is our success. We've seen these industries grow and change in our 70 years. One thing never changes: GSG's dedication providing the best products and services available. We've been around, we'll be around, from the highs and the lows, standing right here with you. GSG, the right products, right away.
All right. Wow. So thanks a lot for watching that. And we got some more people here. So Ray says watching from his car on the way to Fayetteville. He stopped, of course. Good job. Don't crash. Gene Hatch says, good morning, Dr. Dennings.
Good morning, everyone.
I love this comment. Amy Lou Atkinson. Yeah, what an awesome name, Amy Lou, by the way, from the Screen Printers Resource. Amy, I don't think I've met you. We need to introduce ourselves to each other and see if we're related. Javier says, hello, gentlemen. And Frank's here. Good morning from scorching hot Houston. So good to see you, Frank. And thanks for joining us, guys.
Do we know Javier said where he's from? Is this the
He did
time?
not. He just says hello. So let us know.
Yeah, we want to know where you're from and where you're listening from. So thanks a lot. A lot of people from LinkedIn. So
Good.
yeah.
So Dave, maybe not everybody knows who you are, or why don't you just talk about what you do for Kilo and how long you've been in the industry, that type of stuff.
Okay. Well, I've been with Kiwo it'll be 30 years next year.
So you're just a rookie.
Yeah, and just getting started trying to figure this screen printing business out. But I work in the applications lab, kind of oversee that, and involved in product development. So act as product manager for our screen making products. And history prior to Kiwo, it was 8 years with CFAR, the mesh manufacturer. So basically, I know how to make a screen. It's yeah,
that's right.
Things have changed over the years, that's for sure.
Yeah, and if you haven't heard of Dave, he's written some tremendously informative articles and videos and stuff over the years. Yep. So if Mother Google knows all, so just type in Dave Dennings, anything to do with screen, and I bet you there's just a plethora of information that comes up. So
So if you have insomnia, you don't need the medication. Just read one of my articles and it'll put you out.
I doubt that. But all right. So we've got some topics queued up today. So I think the first one we go with is there's new. Everybody always wants to know about the new stuff. And for you guys have a new exposure unit that's a laser. I get to do the laser quotes, right? And so tell us about that a little bit and how it works and who might be using it and why they should be interested in that.
Yep. Well, laser is our LX series and is mainly catering to the textile market. We have a flatbed and we have a vertical unit that's just come out. And I guess the benefit of the laser system is a direct laser, direct imaging system in general combines both the imaging and exposing in one step. And the trend is towards integration and automation. And this is what the laser systems do. We have a 2540 DPI, runs through a DMD micromirror device. So very high resolution imaging. And this is the trend. You're seeing more and more people interested in this technology versus the inkjet masking, because with the inkjet masking, you've got the consumable of the ink that you've got to purchase. Yep. So this is definitely the way the industry is moving.
Yeah, agreed. And I've seen these out in the wild, so to speak. And one of the challenges I think sometimes is tiny details that you could see if it was a toner product, wax or regular ink. To spray out right there, but because it's a laser, there's nothing on the screen when you wash out, right? So are you seeing people adopt an auto washout booth as well as the laser because that gives you more of a consistent washout?
There's certainly interest in that. Again, total automation throughout the screen process, especially with labor shortages. It's tough to get good labor, or any labor for that matter, these days. So I think more and more companies are looking for integration where they can utilize less employees and still operate their screen room. The automatic developing, yes, that's out there. Sometimes we need to be a little careful with the developing. In our testing that we do, we actually have two methods of developing. We develop with a hose end sprayer, just the hose end sprayer on flat setting, to mimic an automatic developer, because most of the automatic developers don't have the same pressure that you would use like in a manual setting with a hand lance with a pressure washer. So we'll develop half the screen with the hose end sprayer, the other half of the screen with a pressure washer, and then compare the results doing a stepped exposure test. So we'll do a exposure calibration, And you'll see sometimes that with the hose end sprayer, we can't open up some of the fine highlight dots, and that you can actually open up with a pressure washer.
Right.
So if you're in the market for an automatic developer, that's something to think about is, do I need the extra pressure? Now, the added pressure, if you develop with a pressure washer, you can damage the shadow dots that are, have only a thread or two to anchor to. So there's a fine balance there. But with these maskless systems, which would be the laser, the direct exposure systems, they don't have a black mask to protect any incidental light or light scatter from inadvertently hitting some of these areas like the small highlight dots. And so those tend to get a little bit of exposure that may need a little bit more pressure to open up. So,
Very good.
And if you're using a laser, are you using a emulsion that's formulated for that, or just you can use what you normally have been using? What do you guys do?
Yeah, well, there's people that are using diazo photopolymers that would like to stick with them. One of the issues is it's going to be a much slower processing. So if you're only exposing a few screens or a handful of screens per day, that may work well. Otherwise, you're going to need multiple machines if you're a high volume shop. Yeah. So the trend is mainly going towards the SBQ. Now, you mentioned that when you do a laser, you can't see the image. However, if you do use a diazo sensitized emulsion, or you add a little bit of diazo to an SBQ, and you laser image it, you will see that you have at least imaged it. You'll see an image on there. Whereas if it's only an SBQ emulsion, typically you aren't, like you mentioned, going to see that.
Okay.
So
I think, Dave, this is important because, as you and I have discussed, and you and I have had these conversations. I remember as we were talking off camera when LED first came out, and now we're into, direct to screen and laser, that these are great innovations in our industry that we've seen. But I like what you said, that with every technology innovation, there could be some drawbacks that we just have to remember. And I'm finding people are not as cognizant knowing, the difference in the latitude, why there's a dual cure, why does it go slower? What is an SBQ? And when we add a diazo to it, especially if they need that little bit sharper resolution or a stronger water resistance, that, there's going to be some drawbacks on the laser, or I shouldn't even say drawbacks. There's going to be some, the only other word I can think of is shortcomings, but there's going to be some situations where they just got to know about where it's post-exposing. You are going to have to slow it down. And sometimes this is a shock to people. I was in a shop this week, and the emulsion they're using with their laser, they've only been running for 3 weeks. They're going, they said, we're shocked on how slow it is because of the emulsion they have. But they are doing plastisol, they're doing UV for drinkware, they're doing, some discharge. So they're trying to run one stencil for everything. And I wouldn't personally do that, but yeah.
Well, but and I find it interesting that people are looking for speed on the emulsion side, and they need something that exposes in 8 seconds. Yeah. And I'm thinking this is not the bottleneck. And oftentimes this is, I'll say, well, how long does it take to develop the screen? And, I've been in shops where they gang up 4 screens on one exposure unit and expose it for 10 seconds and say, this is too slow. This is my bottleneck. But then you'll see them sit around the shop for an hour, not making any screens. And It takes 2 minutes to develop the screen. So unless you've got 4 developers, this is certainly not the bottleneck. And I would much rather have an emulsion that has better exposure latitude, maybe a little bit slower, but provides better exposure tolerance, better latitude, because with these direct imaging systems, light systems, you have less tolerance. You've got to have your screen room much more under control than what you probably had in the past.
Right.
And a lot of people aren't necessarily aware of that. And I think we need to set expectations, to have realistic expectations when you're purchasing this new technology as to what you really need to do. You need to be controlling your EOM much better. you need to have a thickness gauge and know what it is, possibly a coating machine. Although even with a coating machine, if you aren't managing it correctly, you can have stencils that are quite thick and quite thin. And we've had customers call us, say, hey, your coating machine's going haywire halfway through a bucket of emulsion. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, how do you know it's halfway through a bucket of emulsion? Well, the emulsion had gotten thick because they were coating in this dry room because I knew I needed to dry the screen very thoroughly. So I've got real low humidity, high temperature. Well, I've got my coating machine in there too. And I go on break and I don't, remove the emulsion from the coating troughs. Well, the emulsion gets thicker. It's 50% solids instead of 38% solids. Of course, the coating machine is going to coat thicker, but they don't realize this. So there's a lot more attention to detail, and you've got to really control the screen making variables when you embrace some of this new technology. And we need to really share this with the industry so that 100%. They don't get frustrated when they do, embrace the technology and then start to have issues.
100%. And in a way, I'm glad the technology is moving, only because I think it's forcing our industry in the textile side, especially Dave, to do the things that, some of us have always preached, man. You've got to be able to measure your thickness. You got to be able to check your RZ. You got to know how you're coating and stuff. And now this is going to be, as we're automating and going faster, this is going to show you where your weak points are. And if we can start, like you said, manage your expectations ahead of time, that's going to save a lot of heartache going down the road.
Yeah. Hey, Josh has a question. How much time are we talking on dual cure? I know we have SBQ times for 2 to 3 minutes for 2 screens.
Well, it depends a little bit. My pat answer for most questions is going to be, it depends, or you're underexposed, one of the two. But it depends on the light source that you're using. Typically what we say, just generally speaking, that diazo dual cure emulsions are going to take anywhere from 4 to 8 times slower or longer, I should say, exposure times than most SBQs or most fast SBQs. And that's to get the equivalent cure through. Now, what I'm finding is because the diazo photopolymers have a much wider underexposure latitude, customers are not going 3 to 4 times longer. They're going maybe 50%, 80%, 100% longer than their SBQs and getting away with it because of that underexposure tolerance that the diazo provides them. However, if they're under curing, you get more staining of the mesh, you get more pinholes, premature breakdown, and issues associated with undercure.
Yep, reclaiming problems. Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to just catch up on folks watching here. So Javier says he's in the Triad area of North Carolina. Awesome. And then that Dave must know Steve Reniker.
Yes.
And Mike's here. Good morning, Mike from California. Our good pal Cindy's here. Good morning. And then Javier also says he's also a rookie, Dave, just so you know.
30. Yeah.
Charles is here. Good morning, Charles. William's here. Good seeing you. That's the question I just did. Ray says, or RZ, that's even poorer when the EOM is correct. And Dawn is good morning from Kansas City.
For me too. How you doing, Dawn?
So good seeing you. All right. Well, cool. So, how many of the laser units do you guys have out in the field now? I think you guys debuted this, if I remember right, at Printing United last year, right?
Yeah.
How's the reception going? Are everybody enjoying them? Or
well, there's a little learning curve for some of them, but I think, what do we have? I need other people on this line, but I think we have 4 out in the field right now, and all are operating, and they're quite impressed with the resolution they get. And we come in and we have to, we calibrate the machine and we do exposure testing with them to help get them dialed in. And so thus far, it's going well. Yeah.
And if somebody wanted to see one of these things, are you going to have them at a trade show booth? Can they go see it at a shop? I mean, how do you typically show it off?
Yeah, we usually have one in the lab, and I'm looking out into the applications lab as it's getting packed up and ready to ship to a customer. So that's one of the problems. We always have to time it right, where we actually have a lab unit on premise, but we usually have them at the Long Beach show or Printing United show, and we can show it there, or we'll bring them into the lab, or we can bring them to a customer if the customer's willing to have them in. Yeah.
And I love this because the laser technology has been around for a few years here in the United States, and there's been just only like one player in there. And, you know, I love when technology goes, because now, you know, there's not a monopoly. There are, you know, other players in the sandbox, and that's just going to increase just innovation and technology too. So this is a great thing. I'm extremely excited about it. I know when I saw the LX Series 2, it looked very, I almost want to say beefier, but heavier, a lot more stable. So sometimes as you see, if people have seen these lasers, they're moving so fast, sometimes there could be a little bit of a bounce. So you want a very steady, you know, heavy machine. So yeah, it was the first thing I noticed.
One of the things that we talked about earlier, that the paradigm shift from going from inkjet, a lot of these customers were inkjet imaging with either you know, the iMage or XTS or what have you out there. So an inkjet masking system has inherent gain, because as it jets the ink, you get a little bit of growth to that, that detail. So we were talking about halftone dots, and the highlight dots, for example, you're going to get gain with an inkjet masking. And now you go up to the laser and get the higher resolution of the laser. Well, this is exposing the reverse. It's exposing the negative. And so there's no gain. In fact, it's choking your highlight dots. And this is something that the customers have to be aware of, because you put a machine in, and this is why I emphasize the fact that we come in and calibrate the machine and do exposure calibrations. We'll do curves for you to get you back to where you were printing before, because their first look at it and they say, wow, we're not carrying that 10% dot that we were carrying with the inkjet masking. Well, was it really a 10% dot? Even with the inkjet, it was probably a larger dot. And now we're exposing the reverse, which is going to choke that dot a little bit. And so this is some of the stuff that they need to understand. And we help to try to educate them as they embrace this new technology.
And that's important, that when you buy a machine like this, that you have the people in the service to come through and do the linearization. And that's the other word for the curve Dave was talking about. So you can see the prints and the dots that you can print on your press, your machine, in your settings. And that's extremely important.
And so do you guys have like a Photoshop action command or like a curve setting or something that somebody could just push their stuff through, like a rip or something, where it automatically does it for you once you get the settings correct?
Yes. Yeah. RIP. You set that up in the RIP.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Ray says the resolution of this laser for my clients is what interests me. It sets it apart from other lasers. And by the way, he wants one to test. So you'll get that tomorrow, right? I mean,
well, and Ray caters to another segment of the industry that's, you know, aerospace, medical, electronics, and so, you know, we sell the Lucier system as well, and I think that laser system would be more appropriate for what Ray is looking at.
I would agree.
Yeah. And then happy to hear you talk about the gain on the inkjet. Ran into this issue when testing a laser screen shop that I work with. Thanks. Very interested in like your name. If you could drop that in there, that'd be great. So
I believe this is Aaron out of Missouri at Freeman Screen Professionals.
Right.
Yeah.
Here. Yeah. And Ray says, yep, that's the one. All right, cool. So, hey, let's switch gears here and let's talk about exposure challenges. I think, you know, there's only a limited amount of people that might be getting a laser, but I think everybody deals with this. So it's more of a universal topic, right? So what do you think is the leading cause of your stencil exposure challenges out there that people really need to be paying attention to?
Oh boy, that's kind of a tough one. The fact that I don't want to don't want to put anybody. I talk to, I take all the incoming calls for technical calls that come in, and I'm astounded by how few printers that are making very good money and have very happy customers don't own an exposure calculator or don't know how to actually conduct an exposure test.
Absolutely.
With their system. And I think that that's a prerequisite, is to, if you're imaging with film with a conventional analog light source, that you should invest in an exposure calculator, no matter what the cost is.
Yep.
Because that is your printing plate. The screen is your printing plate. And you need to have that thing dialed in. You'll be far more productive, which leads to profitability, fewer remakes, rejects, downtime on press. But a lot of the exposure challenges, to add to that, are related to artwork, maybe to mesh, where the client is asking for some real intricate artwork and we need a heavy ink deposit. So they're choosing a coarser mesh and they're wondering why they can't pick up this detail on this mesh count. So what's the obvious thing to do is drop your exposure time to try to open up some of this intricate artwork. And but there's issues with that, and they really need to understand how to do this exposure calibration test, which is a two-part function, really. One is to determine where you're getting adequate cure through to the squeegee side.
Yep.
And the other is to, at that exposure step, are we getting the resolution that is required for the job? And therein lies a lot of the problems. And then other than that is not knowing your emulsion thickness and knowing that it may vary from screen to screen. Again, a customer of ours with a coating machine, we were coating screens. He was coating 110 mesh and filled up the coating troughs and started coating until the coating trough was almost completely depleted, and didn't realize that, well, he's going to have a huge variance in his emulsion thickness by doing that. And we ended up going to lunch, come back, and we measure the stencil thickness on those 10 screens we coated. And the first screens that we coated with a full coating trough were nearly 100% thicker, higher EOM than the last screens coated. And he was upset about the coating machine. And I said, well, no, it's the head pressure, the weight of the emulsion also contributes to the emulsion buildup. Yep. And if you don't even know what your stencil thickness is, you can have exposure-related problems. But the key is to have your screen what we call bone dry, probably not that dry because it can be brittle if you're too dry, but very, very dry at the time the screen goes into the exposure unit. A lot of people have a nice drying cabinet or drying room, and they control that. They've got a hygrometer, dehumidifier, heater in that room, and no, I'm at 40%, and it's or 30% relative, whatever. They pull them out and stage them in another room because that's a smaller room, and they pull them out, and they don't realize that the emulsion will reabsorb any moisture in the air. So if the staging room or the room that they're storing them in is not equally controlled, the emulsion will reabsorb that moisture. And then especially when you bring it into the exposure room, ergonomically speaking, we want the washout booth fairly close to the exposure unit, right? So we're going into the exposure room and we've got a washout booth real close by, which is pumping the humidity up. And they don't realize this, that the emulsion's reabsorbing the moisture and causing undercured, what appears to be undercured stencils. So that's another key aspect of exposure. Of course, density on the films play a part as well.
So Ray says he loves your 10-step exposure calculator. It's the best in the industry. And he wants the picture to arrive in the driveway next week. And he also says tension from screen to screen causes EOM variances as well, even with an autocoder. Javier says is a long way from Ruby Lift days. 90% of the shops never make exposure calibrations, and the rest usually do it wrong. Kiowa has a very accurate kit. Mark Saldonic says, Dave, question I always get or deal with: how does screen tension affect EOM coating of the screen? this is the second major issue I see besides underexposure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good question. Well, a couple of things. The higher the tension, the larger the mesh opening becomes, right?
Mhm.
So the less tension, the smaller the mesh opening, higher tension, and then less movement. So low tension screen moves a lot. So you've got your mesh moving during the coating. Also, you have to have a higher dive. A dive means how much inward pressure you have to exert with the coating trough. So if you have a coating machine, the coating troughs come in and break the plane of the mesh. Well, with a low tension screen, you have to increase that dive to get an even coating on the screen. Well, if you increase the dive, you're changing the angle of the attack angle of the coating trough to the mesh. If you've got a nice tight screen and your coating trough comes in, you've got this angle. But if it has to break you have to hit higher dive, the mesh deflects more and you've got a steeper dive. So you're going to deposit more. It's like kind of like printing with a low angle on the squeegee.
Yep.
The lower the angle, the more ink you're laying down. Well, the lower the angle of the coating trough to the mesh, the more you're going to deposit as well.
I let people know that if you see a screen and all of a sudden it's lighter on the edges and real darker in the middle, yeah, your tension is bad. That's exactly what it is. It's a lot more emulsion deposit, and it's impossible to get a complete, accurate exposure all the way through.
Right. And Ray also confirms what you just said. The tension affects trough edge pressure and changes angle and shear rate of the emulsion. Higher tension generally creates a thinner EOM on the same mesh.
Yeah. These are all basic fundamentals that, that just make you a better printer. I love what Dave said. This is the main part. This is the plate. Your screen is your printing plate. I don't care how much equipment you have. You can have the most expensive automatic press. You can have the best dryer. You can have the best imaging system, a laser, a wax jet, whatever. But if your screen is garbage, tension, and bad coating and stuff, you're going to have bad prints.
Well, this industry is widely known for blaming the ink.
Yeah.
Right? Blaming the ink, blaming the press, blaming the squeegee, and not even thinking about the screen room at all, because typically we put our worst employees in there.
Yep.
That's who mans the screen room, is the guy that always shows up late or he's drunk or something. That's who's in the screen room instead of our most anal, awesome, logistically minded person. And I've been to so many shops where the screen room is just a disaster, and they're having they're printing 3 revolver mode on the press because they're all they're wanting is a better white ink.
Yeah. And we hear it's, everything is about profitability, about labor. And you know what? You make a correct screen, correct tension, correct coating, and you're going to have way better prints, better opacity, less ink deposit, faster print speeds, production speeds, and that's all profit.
How come this is such an industry secret? Where do we get this information? I wish somebody would talk about it. Sorry, I'm being.
Well, and I've said it before, and I'll go out on a limb. When I started in the industry way back, over 30 years ago,
1927, right?
Oh, at least, we had to, as a full service distributor, I had to know stuff like this. So I went to, training school at Autotype and Yolano and everything there. We had to know this and teach it and be able to share with our clients. It seems like now, it's again, as we increase in technology, we kind of have slid into that Walmart mentality of just buy the product and worry about the problems later. And those problems are, killing your profitability. So, when we have a company like GSG, which will do, has a Mark Soldonic that will help out, most people also don't realize 20, and I still don't know what the problem is because I've been doing it this way for 20 years. Absolutely.
Right.
Let me retouch that. The way I put that is, don't confuse me with facts. My mind is made up. So, I think most people don't realize that you can call your emulsion manufacturer, whether it's Kiwo, Yolano, and most people I was talking to a guy yesterday, Dave, had no idea that Kiwo, Yolano were kind of the same company, two different brands on there. And they're going, no way. When did that happen? I go, oh, I don't know, 23 years ago. So,
but I commend them for reaching out to the manufacturer because, no offense to the forums or whatever, I don't go on them, but, or YouTube, reach out to the manufacturer. They'll usually have an applications lab of some sort and have done trials and tests and will give you sound information as opposed to getting the answers from maybe a colleague that knows as little as you do.
Well, and one of the downfalls of our industry is we learn tribally. I learned from Dave, and I taught Marshall, and Marshall taught Josh Wiley and stuff. Well, how do we know that the person that taught Dave wasn't a maniac and didn't know what the heck he was doing? Now we've just processed that all the way, and that's what happens. And
on the flip side, the beauty of it is very forgiving process.
Absolutely.
You go in and you're stunned by some of the procedures that you see in place, and the prints are not bad. They've got happy customers. They're profitable business, and so and it's a low cost of entry business. So we like that aspect of it.
And you know what? It is very low cost of entry, and it is very forgiving, especially here when a majority of textile printing is done with plastisol. Now, we move to something I want to do discharge. I want to do an HSA water base. Now we're into a little different process there because plastisol is the most forgiving ink. There's no solvents in it. Your screen could be underexposed. You're not going to notice unless you put a solvent on it and cleaning it. Then you might notice then. You start going to a discharge, and now you're going to notice because there's water in it, there's solvent in it, and now you're going, why is, the call goes to the manufacturer. What have you done different to your emulsion because it's breaking down? Well, we added more pinholes to it. We can do that. And this is with more and more people going to, lasers with LED and stuff. This is where stencil challenges come in. They're not even challenges. It's, it's very easy to set up a process to check your exposure, on all your stuff. Because most companies I see are doing at least a little bit of discharge. And now it's get the right light, the right stencil, and have the right tools.
Well, you mentioned the LEDs and related to stencil exposure challenges. One of the things that we found, and we've tested several of the LED exposure, the standalone LED exposure systems out there. And we have customers that are ditching their metal halide light source, the old antiquated metal halide OLED that I have, for the new LED that's going to expose much faster, or at least that's what they were told. And I have multiple customers calling me and saying, I can't find the right exposure time. I'm using your diazo dual cure emulsion on this new LED light source. This is supposed to be much, much faster, but the stencil's falling apart. And I have to sadly share with them that, that was not an upgrade from your OLED, that was a downgrade. If you're using fluorescent tubes, LED is certainly an upgrade. If you're using SBQs, then yes, what we're finding is ironically, actually, the LEDs are most compatible with SBQ emulsions.
Correct.
In fact, the LEDs, even some of the economical ones out there, match the speed of our OLED. So the benchmark in our lab is an 8K OLED at 60 inches with a narrow reflector to get the best resolution. And so that's the best light source on the market that I'm aware of.
Yes.
And so we'll compare everything to that. And these LEDs will expose as fast as our 8K OLED at 60 inches with SBQs, But when we put a diazo photopolymer on there, we required 2.5 times longer exposure time than our metal halide using an LED, and the resolution looked atrocious. If we cured to no color change, which is what where we use the exposure calculator and we determine that this is adequate cure through. So people would look at us and say, you must be Looney Tunes. This can't be the proper exposure because the edge definition looks horrible and resolution's not good. So nobody is exposing to that 2.5 times longer than a metal halide, but they're buying these LEDs without knowing what they've got, or if there's going to be a change. They thought that it was going to be a faster and higher quality, better imaging process. Now, LEDs certainly lower power consumption. They last forever. You have uniformity of light depending on how many diodes you have in your system. So that's all a given and very good. But we just have to educate the market and manage their expectations, and hopefully they find out some information before they make a purchase away from a metal halide to an LED, especially if they're using a diazo or diazo dual cure emulsion.
Agreed.
Hey, Mark wants to know, have you guys done testing on the LX100 or 200 with different micron thicknesses with thick coat?
Yes. Mark's a big proponent for our thick coat. Shout out to Mark. He does a lot of testing with that. GSG is a very good distributor for us. Mark, we just did 150 micron EOM on a 110 white mesh that we cured on the LX system. Early stages with the thick film applications, but 150 with a 110 white is no problem. Beyond that, we haven't quite gotten that far yet. But what do you see as the common stencil thickness for thick film applications?
Yeah, leave a comment.
Yeah,
John, any SBQs able to do discharge?
Yes. We actually have a new one out in the field being test marketed right now. So any of our test market products have it's a number, a lab number. So it hasn't been named yet. But beyond that, what's off the shelf currently is Ulano Trifecta, performs very well with discharge inks. Our Polycol Multitex on the Kiwo side does very well. However, again, you start printing water-based or discharge, and depending on what your imaging and exposing systems are, you may have to take some added steps for durability and strength and or resolution. And that oftentimes involves adding a little bit of diazo additive, not the amount that you would put into a diazo dual cure, but maybe a quarter of the amount that you would put into a diazo dual cure. You can add into an SBQ. Now understand that will slow your exposure speed a bit, but it certainly enhances your durability. But probably the biggest thing that I can share as far as printing discharge and water-based that we've seen advantage to is post-exposure. We've done a lot of print testing with different emulsions, with different inks, co-solvent water-based, high solids acrylics, discharge, and we found that since the market is mainly under curing for various reasons, that we needed to also incorporate an undercured stencil into this print testing. And undercured emulsions, especially SBQs with water-based and discharge especially, breaks down very quickly if it's not properly cured. So what we do is we also incorporate post-exposure into those stencils. And post-exposure is where you have developed the screen, dried the screen, so you have your stencil in your screen. You go back and you re-expose the squeegee side this time, because that's the vulnerable side. This is where we're dropping ink, but this is the side that has the least amount of cure. To use a Richard Greaves, I loved his analogy of the hamburger on the grill.
Exactly.
You just grill it from one side, you're gonna be burnt on one side and raw on the other. Well, that's similar to our exposure systems, right? We're curing quite well on the shirt side, but what needs to be cured well is the squeegee side. And because light penetrates slowly over time through the coating, the squeegee side is always going to have the least amount of cure. Well, we need that to be a full amount of cure, and you can carve back some, actually excellent durability. We did 30% undercured and ran 2,000 pieces with a co-solvent water base, and the screen that we did not post-expose broke down within 200 pieces.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So 200 to 2,000 with post-exposure.
Dave, there's a question always too. If somebody's using a complete dual cure, a true dual cure, or a diazo, they'll go and try to post-expose them. Now, I'm told, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm going to defer to you, dual cures do not post-expose. Would that be true?
No, that they do post-expose. My humble estimation, I'm trying to change the terminology because I find it quite confusing.
Yeah.
Some manufacturers of emulsion call a hybrid they refer to an SBQ dual cure, which an SBQ can have light sensitive resin.
Right.
A diazo dual cure means that it has light sensitive resin in it as well as the diazo.
Correct.
Okay, so that's a dual cure. Well, the same applies to SBQs. You have the SBQ sensitizer, which we do in manufacturing, but you can also have a light sensitive resin. That resin will stay behind depending on how aggressively you wash it out. The PVA will rinse down the drain. So if you've undercured badly and you rinse the screen, well, a lot of it, you're right, Alan, it's going to be down the drain, so you're not going to get any benefit. But you will have some partially cured emulsion that lingers on the squeegee side, and you will still have the resin. If it's a dual cure, diazo dual cure or SBQ dual cure, that means there's light sensitive resin that can further harden with post exposure.
Okay. Yeah. Very good. Well, thank you. That, like I said, that's a discussion point that comes up, and yeah, I appreciate it.
So Mark says, by the way, 250 micron seems to be the norm for customers that are using. He sees a lot of HD printing this year. And speaking of HD, Hurley's here.
Yeah. So, Chris Bolts.
Yeah. And then Josh, 3140 Newark, choke point for us, Kiwa Poly S using now, trying to speed this up. And he would love to have a chat.
Yeah. So, Poly Plus S, man, we're talking a complete dual cure solvent resistant stencil, just a flagship product that's been around for a year. But there's some large latitude in there too.
Yeah. So, all right. So I have some topics here, but I think we covered them. So EON tips, we talked about that. We talked about post-exposing. So maybe we just wrap up for the rest of the time here. We'll just talk about the common problems that you see in the screen room, and then maybe we can talk about how to avoid those. And that could be with reclaiming or, whatever, right? So Dave, you talk to lots of folks. You teach classes, you write articles, you've been around the block. What are the things that your most frequently asked questions? Kind of get a couple of those out. Because not everybody's got all the gizmos. They're just using a hand trough or whatever they're doing. Let's get some facts going their way so they can solve some problems.
Yeah. Well, one that I'm not asked, so I want to share this one because they're not maybe as aware of this, is degreasing.
Oh yeah.
Well, maybe we better define what degreasing is because nobody does it anymore. But so you reclaim your screen, you remove the ink, the emulsion, and dehaze, take the stain out. Then you should really degrease the screen. After degreasing, what I find is, and I'll ask customers that call in, well, how are you, because they're either suffering from pinholes, there's contamination, I don't understand, it's breaking down. And I'll walk through the process of after you reclaim and degrease your screen, how are you drying your screen? And if it's on the floor with a fan, right? I tell them I'm coming into your shop and I'm going to put white gloves on and I'm going to wipe your floor. I'm going to wipe your fan and your blade on your fan, and I'm not going to get any dust or dirt on my gloves, correct? And of course they start laughing. And so a dripping wet screen that you put on a dirty floor in front of a dirty fan is getting you nowhere. We can, in fact, okay, if you are degreasing, we can save you time. Don't bother degreasing because it's not helping the way you're drying your screens. So we recommend, ideally, if they've got good housekeeping as far as getting all the ink and emulsion off the screen, we use a shop vac, a wet vac. And after I degrease, now don't use it as a multi-purpose tool. Don't suck up water on the floor and things like that. We have a dedicated wall rack that we hang it, and then we always keep that wand very clean. But I will take a water vac and extract 95% of the water off a degreased screen like this. Now I rack it, and I'll get that screen dry much faster with far less contamination, and be able to turn those screens around far quicker than if you're degreasing and then drip drying. Some people say, well, no, I don't have a dirty fan, and no, I know I don't put it on the floor, but they have a dripping wet screen that they rack. And you have to think of the water as a magnet. A t-shirt shop has no, lint or dust in the air, right?
Oh, no.
So, number one product. We make lint.
So the water on the screen, it just attracts the dust and contaminant in the air, and leads to some of these problems, especially if they're coating their emulsion too thin. So you've got this contamination on the mesh, and then you coat with a sharp trough 1-in-1, and you've got such a thin stencil that, of course, this little contamination can break out into pinholes on press.
Yeah.
So got some comments here. So Chris says mostly all my HT screens are 300 plus microns. And he's doing phenomenal work, Dave. I don't know if you've noticed him or not. And Charlie's here. Good morning. And he actually has a question, which is, how much exposure time would you recommend starting to expose a 200 micron film with an LED unit?
Depends on the mesh count and color and the, I guess the LED light source, but and the detail involved. The 200 micron film, if it's real intricate detail, just by nature of the process, you're going to get some undercutting. So tiny details start to close in. So you've got to be careful with that. But LED, so what are the most common ones? These M&R Starlight out there, something like that. 200 micron. Now, we would normally put it on an 8370 micron thread, 83 yellow mesh with a 70 micron thread to get some of the mesh out of the way. I don't know if this is what we're talking about, Charlie, or is it like a 110 white mesh? But you're probably looking at 2.5 minutes, something like that. But I would certainly do a bracketed exposure again, doing a stepped exposure at several different intervals to find out which one's coming closest. And then you can even redo a bracketed exposure with even closer tolerances on a second screen, depending on how intricate the detail is.
Charlie just posted the mesh.
And I'm assuming he's using a fast exposing SBQ, the other variable. 8370 yellow.
8370 yellow. So
yeah. So with like our thick coat, I would probably be working at 2.5 to 4.5 minutes. I'd probably do a stepped exposure anywhere between those exposure times. You can soak it. I don't know if you soak the screen 4 or 5 minutes before you start power washing, or you just power wash it from the print side. Try not to put much water on the squeegee side will help. Again, post exposure will certainly help if we have to undercure a bit for detail.
And Chris says he's exposing 200 microns at 4 minutes on his DIY LED exposure unit. And
Chris, can I ask, are you measuring that? Are you using an exposure calculator, or is that just through trial and error? Because you're doing incredible work, and I'd love to know.
And Javier says I used to use a glass squeegee on the screen after washing the screen before putting it on the rack, just to card all the water off.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. So, what do you think about the auto reclaimers out there? right? And it's kind of the dishwasher unit. There's all variations of them, and I know a lot of folks, because I've been to shops, don't really clean them. And don't do the things that need to do, and they just kind of let it go. And then when it doesn't work anymore, that's when they have the giant emergency, right? So what are you seeing out there, Dave?
Well, same. So we put our chemicals in a lot of these machines, and our emulsions for sure. But what I'm stunned by is they don't realize how much sludge are generated. These automatic machines are recycling, right? So it has a recycle tank. And before, out of sight, out of mind, I guess, because when they were doing it manually in a washout booth, the ink or emulsion goes down the drain and they don't see it.
Yeah.
But, the plastisol ink is 100% solids. The emulsions are, at least 40% solids usually. So that means it's not going away. Yeah. It's going to be settling in your tank. And if you don't do proper maintenance, you will have issues with your machine. But they just, they're stunned by how much sludge they have to manage and keep it clean and whatnot. So yeah, that's a critical part. We've dealt with a couple of customers that were doing 1,000 screens per day. And the best ones, they actually had a team that would come in once a week, shut it down for an hour and a half and completely clean the inside, the brushes, the nozzles. Mm-hmm. And quite honestly, that's what you need to do if you want to keep it operating efficiently. Otherwise, you're going to have to manage problems as you go along.
100%.
A preventative maintenance program. Oh my gosh. How
I would definitely say, yeah. And, it's funny because, as we automate and stuff, no matter whose chemical, what machine you have, there is a maintenance that has to be done. I love what you said, Dave, that, and I'm thinking they've always produced that much sludge. They just never had to see it before.
Yeah.
And it's always there. But then no matter what chemical, what machine, it's what are you doing? How's that screen looking going in? In our mind, when someone is looking auto reclaim, I always use, and I've done this in seminar, we have the George Jetson approach. In our mind, worst screen known to man, it's this wood screen from 1979 with 7 quarts of plastisol still left in it. That's been sitting there for 3 years, not cleaned out. We put it in the machine, hit a button, the George Jetson music starts, and it comes out, bing, a brand new Newman roller frame that's 50 newtons. And that's in our mind.
Yeah.
Where in reality it is what is your screen looking like? How much maintenance on there? The more ink you have left in there, the more chemical is going to be used, the more sludge are you exposing properly? Because if you're not, you're going to have staining issues. Your stencil's not going to expose. And then that's when they call and say, your machine is a problem. Your chemical is not working. Well, it might not be that.
Also, here's the thing. The owner of the company is in his office and
Correct.
He hears the worker complaining, and the worker's the one that's not doing things properly. And they'll just say, this thing just doesn't work.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Or they buy the equipment with the expectation that the screens coming out are going to be dehazed as well.
Yeah.
And there's not a ghost remover in that process. And this is why we often incorporate a washout booth at the end to do touch-up, minor touch-up, or dehazing, or what have you.
Yeah. Right. All machines, they do not have eyes. They just do what they do.
Yeah.
Right.
They don't have eyes.
So Chris says here, have you ever had a high-density stencil chip off and reclaim before? Like paint chips flaking off. I'm coming across this quite often lately, and I make a mess out of his washout booth and filters.
Yeah, all the time. The thicker the stencil, you're not going to. So when you're working with a standard emulsion thickness on a standard mesh count, likely you get the stencil remover to penetrate more thoroughly through that coating. When you're working with thick stencils, you'll penetrate partially, but you won't penetrate all the way through. So a couple of things that I've done. So it's actually fairly common. Normally, I would say if you're seeing that on a standard stencil, that you're probably under curing is why it's coming off in chunks. It should be dissolving. But with thick stencils, you just don't get it to absorb in. You can do a dip tank, or what you could do, what I've done in the past, is actually apply the stencil remover only to the squeegee side, brush the squeegee side, and power wash the squeegee side only, and you'll see that thing come off of the screen like a postage stamp. And then you can grab that whole stencil almost, the whole stencil, and just throw it away instead of having all these little paint chips flying off the screen. So now you may have to come back, and after you've removed it, you may have to touch up and power wash the other side of the screen as well.
Yeah.
But just work it off from the squeegee side and just hammer it off with a pressure washer and watch the whole stencil pretty much stay intact as you're peeling it off the screen.
Yeah, so it happens on his 600 and 900 micron stencils, which is pretty thick. It happens when my stencil's 3 feet thick. I don't know.
Yeah. How does he get ink through that? But yeah, I would use that. I would try that technique and see if that doesn't work for you.
Yeah,
I like
that's
that.
how he reclaims. Right. All right. Well, cool. Hey, we're out of time. So I wanted to share your email. So let me get that fired up here. So if you've got any questions, you can reach out to Dave here at Kiwo, daved@kiwo.com. You would happily answer anybody's questions, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And will you be at Fort Worth? Will you be at Printing United? If somebody wants to meet you or talk, shop, whatever, will you be at those shows?
I'm not planning to be at Fort Worth, but we'll be at Printing United this year.
Okay.
Yeah. Always at Long
Just
Beach.
down the street from you guys, right? I mean,
Yeah. Well, we have a rep that lives up in Dallas, so he goes and I think he works with GSG up there at Fort Worth.
Right. Okay.
Yeah,
well,
I mean, it's Texas. It's just a state. How big can it be? Oh, wait, it's 5 hours away from where Kiwo's at.
Right.
So,
all right. Well, great. So anyway, thanks a lot for being on the show today. And we really appreciate you. And any last words of wisdom before we go today? Either you or Dave, Alan?
well, I just want people to know, we didn't do a pulse today that we usually do with GSG. You said their system was
They're
down.
having some technical difficulties.
Yeah, we want to always thank GSG. And, GSG is one of the companies that is doing training classes on a lot of different sectors. They also are one that will help, on any technical problems. So they're doing a great job on there. They're a large Kiwo dealer, Kiwo Yolano dealer. So we want to always give them the props for what they do. Dave, I want to thank you again for coming on the show and just for your help and what you do for the industry. And I look forward to seeing you at Pretty United. I think that might be a good show for us. And Marshall, next week, are we going to have?
Let's talk about next week, right? There's something special going on.
Well, let's let Dave any last words before we go to this little commercial. But yeah.
No, but I'm not on. Well, actually, I have a Facebook account. I don't know how to even navigate it. I'm an old guy. Kiwo, I think, has a minor presence in both Facebook and Instagram. But sadly, no, I'm not up with that social media.
Not up with that newfangled stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Chris, I would email Dave at his email address. And Dave, if you've not seen Chris, he's up in Canada doing incredible HD and silicone. He's really doing some great stuff.
Awesome. Love to see it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So next week is Shirt Lab New Orleans. So we'll be trucking over there to New Orleans, Louisiana for that awesome event. And want to thank GSG for they're one of our sponsors as well as Easy Way, right? Yep. Need to hit you guys in Kiwo up there, Dave. But anyway, next week's show, because of Alan's flight, is going to be 1 hour later than normal. You'll see a bunch of stuff on as we market the show, but it'll be 1 o'clock Eastern time instead of our 12 o'clock Eastern time start. And that's we're accommodating. And by the way, we don't know where we're going to have it yet. That's something I'm scouting out. So if you're going to be at Shirt Lab New Orleans, it could be in the lobby of the hotel. It could be in a conference room. We don't know. So if you're actually there and you want to kind of hang out on the show, I'll bring all my cameras and stuff. We'd love to just have whoever's there stop in. just text me or whatever, and then I'll let you know where we're going to be. So, but
Absolutely.
anyway, so next week, 1 hour later, and hopefully Alan isn't delayed.
Hopefully. I have no control over the airlines. I can do a lot, but yeah, I'm at the mercy of them like everybody else. So,
All right. Well, great. Well, hey,
but if not, then there's going to be a bunch of people around, so just grab them.
yeah, I'm sure Richard will be in, and there'll be a lot of people there.
I know Mark Soldanic's going to be there. So
yeah, he's coming in on Wednesday. So we're already planning dinner.
all right, great. Hey, we have a couple of last people that have.
Yeah. So Charlie says thanks. Frank says thanks. William says thanks. Donna says thanks. Who do we miss? Frank says possible UPS strike. And Javier says see you in Georgia in October.
Absolutely, Javier. Make sure you come by, introduce yourself. Let's. I have a feeling, Javier, that we have met already before, but
yeah. All right, cool. Well, hey,
Alan, thank you very much for inviting me.
Oh, absolutely, anytime. And yeah, Dave, you're welcome on here anytime you guys want. If you have anything new, anything else to share, let us know.
Okay.
And don't go anywhere. We're just going to end the show. So thanks a lot. We'll see you guys later. See you next week.
Bye-bye.